Okay, so I want to discuss our cultural heritage, right? There's a lot of discussions around the terms that we're using to talk about these different political movements and political statuses, but those are still not cultural heritages, right? ADOS, FBA, those are political movements. Even with something like Freedmen, that's still just a social status. That's still just a political status. What is our cultural heritage? What ethnic group do we originate from? And I would say that is Atlantic Creoles, specifically U.S. Atlantic Creoles. If you notice, when we talk about Haitians, when we talk about their language, we call it Haitian Creole. If we go to Barbados, they will speak with a Bajan accent, or even like a Bajan language, which is a Creole. And a Creole forms when there's a mix of populations or and cultures and languages. And as you can see with all these different dysphoria, that's been the case, right? Haitian Creole is a mix of like African and French language, culture, etc. Okay, that didn't just magically not happen to us here in the U.S. Okay, now this has happened all across the world. There's these islands in the Indian Ocean, okay, that are populated. I think one is called La Reunion. Okay, there's La Reunion. There's Indian Ocean Creoles because these are regions that are closely connected to the Indian Ocean, right? To the different navigations and migrations and that sort of thing, and they developed different Creole languages, and that's what they identify as. They do identify as Creoles. Well, that happened in the U.S. as well, and there's this false narrative going on that we've like always started as slaves, like there were slave gardens, and that's where we come from, even though that's just a false narrative. We come from communities and ethnic groups and cultures and empires and kingdoms. But actually, some of the first black identified U.S. inhabitants that were either indentured servants or trafficked there were already creolized. Okay, starting in the 1500s, the late 1500s, uh, Portugal settled in Angola. So there was already all of this cultural exchange happening in Angola. So when these raiders went to go capture people in Africa to traffic to the US, a lot of these captives were already creolized. They already had like uh, Portuguese names. A lot of them were baptized, okay? A lot of them were multilingual, okay? Or they spoke a Creole. And this helped them navigate in colonial Virginia and other parts of the colonial US, as some of them were able to own land and they started families. And because that's another false narrative that it was like slavery from the start, chattel slavery from the start. Chattel enslavement didn't solidify. Okay, it was a new concept, right? It didn't solidify until I believe around 1705. And while some of the first black identified people in the US came in 1619, so there was almost 100 years of uh, black identified people, Atlantic Creoles, um, owning land, being free. Everyone was marrying at some point, and so that Creole was allowed to blossom. And later on, as things became more solidified, or before that, more Africans were trafficked to the U.S. and just like Haitian Creole and Bahin, okay, and all these other different places, La Reunion, Mauritania, a Creole developed, right? I think some people call it like AAVE. No, it was Atlantic Creole. That's what they were speaking. Um, just like in all these other places. When people are more familiar with like the Gullah Geechee, right? But they speak a Creole, but we just know more about them because they retained more African elements, more African ethnic elements because they were isolated on the different islands around, I believe, what, Georgia, South the Carolinas. So, but all the languages up and down the eastern seaboard, so we could say we're eastern, some of us were eastern seaboard Creoles because, of course, there was also Louisiana Creoles, right? Who have their own little distinct heritage and lineage. So, U.S. Atlantic Creoles, we could say there's Caribbean Atlantic Creoles, U.S. Atlantic Creoles, Eastern Seaboard Creoles, from the Creole that formed from like Maryland, New York, Georgia, South Carolina. Even down into Florida, there was a Seminole Creole from Africans and Atlantic Creoles mixing with the Seminole Indians. They created their own Creole language as well. So, over a period of time, U.S. Atlantic Creole English, okay, it became decreolized, right? Because North American English started to rise in North America, and through like assimilation and cultural diffusion and that type of thing, this U.S. Atlantic Creole started to become decreolized, and now it's called AAVE or a black scent or whatever. But formerly, it was a Creole language, just like how they formed in all other diasporic uh, populations.